Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great half term. Today's provocation, provocation number 5, is a brief history of education in England and English as a subject. Your outcomes. I'm going to give you a basic understanding of the history of education in England and a basic understanding of the history of English as a subject over the last 50 or 60 years or so. We can link it partially to GCSE. One of the exam papers for question 2 a few years ago was 2 texts based on school. I think that might come up again because they obviously want to find texts that kind of children or young people can associate with a little bit in some way. So as you can see, they've chosen 2 texts here. One was a 19th century ragged school. Right, so education in the Middle Ages, as you can see, from 500 to about 1500. Effectively, the only people that were taught anything were lords, aristocrats, but also particularly priests and monks. The only texts that were available were books, basically biblical books, the Bible, or the Gospels as it was called. Is a very famous example from it's called the Lindisfarne Gospels, and the monks would sit down and scribe for days and weeks and months, and obviously they're very beautiful texts, aren't they? But that was the only writing that was necessary, really, is effectively. So there's the first big change, not specifically education, but was the Gutenberg printing press. It created movable type, and that's just the type you can see, the metal casings. And that meant that you could do away with scribing, literally handwriting, and create texts in much larger numbers. If you're creating text in much larger numbers, the amount of books available will also make the amount of people able to read them. Now, it wasn't quite as simple as that, but effectively that is what happened. More books, more knowledge, more discoveries, and more requirement for more educated people. And the statistics back this up. As you can see, from that period, from the 1400s onwards, there was a gradual increase of literacy, both for men and women. So by the time of 1754, 60% of men could read and 40% of women. Now, obviously, I will show you how the aristocrats got taught, but what was available for poor and middle class people was patchy at best. There were dame schools, which were private schools where you'd pay a small fee, and these were actually for poor people, actually, not for the middle classes. And they were usually conducted in a woman's house, very basic, sometimes very little education actually occurred, a bit more like a child service, really, like a nanny. And there was ragged schools, and these were really just provided by the church, very, very fragmented, not available across all areas, certainly not in inner city areas. So for the aristocrats, a few men would go to university, and it wasn't how we imagine it now. Oxford and Cambridge were there; they were 2 of the most famous universities, but they didn't go to get taught that much, believe it or not. But the aristocrats looked down on scholarly behaviour. They went there to be finish their gentlemanly studies, in a way, to become gentlemen, to become lords, not ladies, and that was finalised by a sort of tour around Europe. That was the finishing part of their education. On the subject of ladies, the girls got taught at home by governesses, sort of the rich and the upper classes, not the lower classes. And they got taught reading and writing, and what was called the accomplishments. And the accomplishments were things like speaking French, apparently, playing the piano, dancing, painting. Basically, the skills that made you ready to find a husband. Things like cooking weren't on that list, by the way, because servants would do that. So in 1800, education for the poor and middle classes was provided almost exclusively by the church. But as the 19th century took over, slowly it was taken over by the state. So by the end of the 19th century, pretty much everything was state run by government. Now this is, I want you to be aware of the literacy rate. This wasn't necessarily entirely the reason. We can't thank the government for that. It wasn't. It was much more a steady process that was happening anyway. But by the end of the 19th century, nearly 100% literacy. So we're going to leap 50 years forward now. The next big major change was after the Second World War. Once it had ended, there was a creation of the welfare state by Labour, and also within education there was this creation of the tripartite system, consisting of grammar schools, secondary modern schools, and secondary technical schools. Okay. In 1965, the Labour wanted to push that even further and to get rid of grammar schools and create comprehensive schools. They were more or less successful, but not completely. There are still grammar schools. And a grammar school is effectively based on ability. It's a state-funded school that you take a test, and if you pass the test, you're in. Now, qualifications. This is the big one. So in grammar schools, up until 1988, you would take a GCE, a General Certificate of Examination, at O level and A level. Now, A levels still exist. They haven't changed much in decades, even since the 1950s. If you didn't get to a grammar school, if you just went to a secondary modern or a comprehensive school, you took a CSE, a Certificate of Secondary Education. That's what I would have taken when I was at school. Now, next big change, 1988. The Conservatives, under Margaret Thatcher, created for the first time a national curriculum that literally explained what should be taught to children and young people. But the other big change was they took the GCE, the General Certificate Examination, and the CSE, and replaced it with one qualification called the GCSE. Okay, now I think generally that was a good thing. It was much more democratic. It was much more, everyone took the same. However, it didn't change for maths, and I don't know the reason for this, by the way. We still have, and some of you have taken maths, so you know this, we still have a foundation paper and a higher paper, which kind of is like a remnant from the old days of a two-tier qualification. Be interested to find out why. So now I'm going to very quickly look at English as an academic discipline, and interesting to note that up until 1930 it wasn't even considered good enough to be a degree subject, and it wasn't even part of the O-level curriculum until 1951. Just shows you how much things change. A bit like today, media studies is considered by some as like a Mickey Mouse degree, not sort of serious enough. All right, so English. I think it's amazing, actually. So in 1966, a group of, as you can see, 50 English teachers from across the spectrum, from primary school teachers, professors of English at universities, 50 of them got together from the US and the UK in America and sat around for 4 weeks discussing what should be an English curriculum. And this is 1966, so and as you can see in the bold at the bottom there, some of the things that they decided were important were student-centred, prioritising speaking and listening, arguing against setting and streaming, which you know means a lot to me, and also, and really importantly, a high value on creativity and imaginative writing. Right. A year later, a government-funded report. They still, this is part of government making reports on different areas of society. They did one on, it says children in their primary schools, but it was also secondary schools. It's called the Plowden Report in 1967. They said very much the same as the Dartmouth conference. Teaching and education, and English in particular, should be student-centred, focus on creativity and imaginative writing. Now, I think most of you, I mentioned this before, various English teachers that are getting published works have commented on this. You can see the top. It's an unfortunate product of educational history that many teachers in Anglophone, that's countries that speak English, have not been taught grammar school. Have not been taught grammar themselves. Alex Quigley, many current teachers, myself included, are part of a generation where grammar went largely untaught. And Jennifer at the bottom, the teaching of grammar has been conspicuously absent from the core business of teaching English in the secondary classroom for around 60 years. Well, now you know. Plowden Report and the Dartmouth Seminar, two very important influences. I would argue, though, and this is my personal opinion here, that I think we need a best of both worlds. We've got to absolutely encourage creativity, because that's one of the ways we can stay relevant in contemporary society, the threat of AI. And rules and knowledge and grammar also play their part. So best of both worlds. Right, so provocation number 5. It's a little bit, not one slide here, it's just a couple of ideas. Okay. I think we'll all agree perhaps that Britain is not very equal, shall we say. There's some facts here that I'll share this slide in Teams later so you can have a look. Let's leave it at that for the time being. Just so you know, there's a pipeline from private schools and grammar schools and only the very best comprehensives into what's called the Russell Group. The Russell Group being the top 28 universities in the UK, with Oxford and Cambridge at the top. Right. Schools and universities are still funded to a certain degree. Okay? But us colleges have had the worst of the funding pressures. For the 16 to 19-year-olds, there's been various levels of funding reduction over the last 10 years, as you can see, 21%, 17%. But particularly important to us, spending on adult education has fallen by 49% from 2009 to 2019, and it hasn't been updated since. Okay, so there's a lot of money taken out of adult education. So, if you want to avoid the threat of AI on any particular job, and if you don't want to be a member of the useless class, which is a result of AI, and if you don't want to be a member of the precariat, having a job that's never predictable or secure, then my provocation for you today is this: you must learn. Search, and if you don't have it, try and search for the joy in learning. Okay, education is precious, and it's becoming even more important because it's slowly being taken away from us. And GCSE, by the way, is still an essential qualification. It's a gateway qualification to the key careers, whether it's for higher education, whether it's funding for higher education, whether it's a police force or nursing or teaching. All these require GCSE, so it's a gateway qualification. All the more reason why I'm going to provoke you. Please learn as much as you can. See you next week.